from Mr. Gordy's vision in a couple of important ways. One, well, I think everybody in this room would agree that the Arkansas education system has a long way to go, especially on reducing the achievement gap between white and minority students and low income and upper income students. I think we have to build on some of the great things that we've done since the Lakeview case. I think if you look at how the state's performance has improved over the last decade, there have been some major improvements. We're ranked number 5 on the Quality Counts Education Week indicator overall for education that looks at policy, infrastructure, achievement. And even on achievement, well, I think everybody would agree that we have a long way to go on student achievement. We're not where we need to be as a state on student achievement. Even there, we've had some major improvements. I think there's a one-pager with a bunch of statistics in your packet that shows some of the progress that we've made. I think if you just look at things like our state benchmark scores for 4th and 8th grade literacy, they've increased dramatically since 2004 and 2011. And the gap between white and black students, while it's still way too large, has narrowed by almost a full 10 points. If you look at the great progress that Arkansas has made in the student participation rate in taking the advanced placement test, major improvement, the gap between white and minority students continues to narrow. Similarly, I'm taking the ACT test. If you look at what Arkansas has done around expanding access to quality preschool education, we've actually been one of the leaders, in the country. We've increased annual funding for pre-K in this state by over $100 million. Out of all of the educational interventions you could do to help low-income and at-risk kids, pre-K really has the highest return on investment. I think the research is pretty clear that if you start grade school already behind your peers, the chances of you catching up and the chances of you going on for further success in school is much lower than your peers. And so having access to quality pre-K program is extremely important for low-income and at-risk kids. And Arkansas is now considered to have one of the best pre-K programs in the country. I think if you combine the ABC program with Head Start, we're serving about 80% of eligible 4-year-olds below 200% of the poverty line, which is great. 3-year-olds, less than half, so we still have some work to do on at-risk 3-year-olds. But it's really on infants and toddlers where much of the early brain development occurs that we still have a long ways to go there. I would just say that it's real important to put many of the reforms in the Lakeview case in proper perspective. Many of these reforms were passed and implemented in 2004, 2005, some even 2007. The last part of the $100 million expansion for pre-K, for example, wasn't even implemented until 2008. So it's really not been in place all of that long. And so to see major gains even beyond the ones that we've seen, it's still going to take a few more years for the impact of those reforms to be felt. Now, having said all that, I think we all agree that there's still a lot of work to be done, especially on closing the achievement gap along racial and economic lines, which by any measure is still large. I think another area where we probably disagree with Mr. Gordy's group is about the potential impact of charter schools. We agree that they do need to be part of the toolkit for education reform, but we don't believe that charter schools represent a large-scale solution to improving educational outcomes for low-income and minority kids. I think at best the research base on the impact of charter schools on student achievement is still mixed at this point in time. I think the most that can be said is that there are some very good charter schools, but there's also some charter schools, quite frankly, that aren't any more effective than traditional public schools, especially once you can control for the impact of income and race. I think before we would contemplate any large-scale expansion of charter schools, we would need answers to the following big questions. One, to what extent are charter schools pushing out low-income and minority students who are failing to meet the grade? 2, what about students with special needs? How are these kids being served by charter schools, and how would they be served if charter schools are dramatically expanded? 3, if we devote resources to charter schools, what impact will this have on the remaining traditional public schools, especially if charter schools are approved in isolated or rural areas? And since not all children will be able to attend charter schools, What would it mean for traditional public schools who will likely have the most difficult students remaining in their programs? Students without transportation, parental support, and students with behavioral and mental health needs. I think expansion of charter schools is not going to eliminate the fundamental question of resource disparities that we know all still exist between well-resourced schools and poorly resourced schools. And I think finally on that issue, what about public transparency and accountability? I think if the last version of House Bill 1040, which was the charter school expansion bill, would have been introduced, clearly we would have two different systems of accountability, and that's troubling to me both as an advocate and as a taxpayer. So where do we go from here? You do also have in your stack a one-pager just on research-based solutions that the OTL coalition believes are important. Rather than go through those, I do want to call your attention to 4 bills that have been introduced or are likely to be introduced this session that the OTL coalition thinks could have a good impact on improving educational outcomes for low-income and minority students. One area, of course, is pre-K. There's probably not going to be an effort to expand funding for pre-K this session, but I think at the very least we cannot go backwards on that. While much of the K-12 system has had some annual increases, for adequacy, pre-K really has not seen any funding. Has not seen any funding increase since 2008-2009. And so, unlike the rest of the education system, pre-K has been flat funded now for about the last 4 years. So that's problematic. That has to change if we're going to reach not only all 4-year-olds, but many more 3-year-olds and start to address the issue of infants and toddlers. I would also encourage you not to endorse House Bill 1352, which was introduced a couple of weeks ago, which basically would have ABC funding follow the child, but would allow the child almost to go to any type of program, not necessarily an ABC program meeting high quality standards. I think passing that bill could really undermine the high standards of the pre-K program. Quality after school and summer programs, I think we need to build on the Positive Youth Development Act of 2011, which set in place a system for creating a high quality network of after school and summer programs in Arkansas. Senate Bill 249 is an appropriation bill that would set aside $5 million to begin implementation of the Positive Youth Development Act. It's a very modest beginning, but I think it's a start. Why is this bill so important, and why is this issue so important? I think the research is really clear here. All other factors being equal, all students learn at the same rate during the school year. Doesn't matter what your income is, doesn't matter what your race is, all other factors being equal. But low-income and minority students and at-risk students are much more likely to lose ground during the summertime. And the reason for that is because they don't have access to the same educational opportunities that, that their upper-income and white peers have. Whether it's access to books, whether it's access to internet-based learning programs, whether it's access to those good educational camps or camps that have more a learning component to them. Low-income students are much less likely to have access to those good, high-quality summer programs. That's key, and you have to reduce summer learning loss, because if you don't, then you're in a situation where low-income kids come back to the school year and they have to relearn some of the skills and material that they lost over the summertime, while other kids can continue moving forward. So again, while they may learn at the same rate during the school year, if all other factors being equal, then this issue of summer learning loss is huge. Senate Bill 295 by Senator Elliott, Education Bill of Rights. This bill is designed to promote greater parental involvement in schools, promote greater parental responsibility for their kids' education, and create an avenue to help parents advocate for their kids so that their kids receive a high-quality education. The bill does 4 things quickly: spells out what parents should expect from their schools as part of a quality education, requires schools to assess the extent to which they're doing each of those things, and if it's not doing those things, it puts in place a process for them to be held accountable. It also requires that schools and districts do a better job of educating parents about what is going on with their child's education, and also responding to parents' requests for meetings and information, things like that, so that parents can be more informed advocates for their kids. And finally, it lays out what is expected of parents and students in terms of responsibilities, in terms of school attendance, homework assignments, attending conferences, etc. Third piece of legislation, disparities in school discipline. We were Arkansas Advocates, under the guidance of Jerry Derlikowski over there, our education policy director, released a study a couple of weeks ago which found that black students were 5 times more likely to receive an out-of-school suspension than their white peers. Well, that's obviously a huge fairness issue, but just as importantly, disparities in school discipline actions is one of the causes related to chronic absence, which is a key factor in the ability to read at grade level, and is also a strong predictor of high school graduation. And obviously, if you're not in class, you can't learn. And to the extent that low-income and minority students or students with disabilities are impacted by these disparities, it impacts their educational opportunities to learn and puts them further behind their peers. We're hoping that this legislation, when introduced, will require the department to determine rates of these incidents for in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, and corporal punishments, and the disparities. Require districts having large gaps to address those in their school improvement plans, and require districts and school report cards to contain those data on those rates that go out to parents. I think we would also want to stop the practice of students receiving out-of-school suspensions for things like truancy, which makes no sense at all. And finally, is the issue of more effective spending of NSLA and poverty funding. As you know, this is funding that districts receive based on their percentage of low-income and at-risk kids. And this is money that is supposed to be spent to help close the achievement gap for low-income kids. As some of you may recall, several years ago, Arkansas Advocates put out a study on this issue that found 2 things. One, many schools were not spending the money, were stockpiling the money. There was legislation passed in 2011 that we think dealt with that issue. But the other finding was that many schools were spending their poverty funding on things that research says may not be the best way to spend it if you really want to improve educational outcomes for low-income and at-risk kids. So, so I think you will likely see legislation. I'm kind of looking down there at Senator Elliott on that issue. That will address that issue in some fashion. But I think that issue is important because this is a flexible pot of money that districts can use for things like after-school programs, summer programs, early literacy programs, high-quality pre-K programs. And so if you're in a district that doesn't have enough funding to do that through, say, the ABC program, you can use this money there. Far too many schools are spending it on things that, quite frankly, aren't having the desired impact. And I think I would just wrap up by calling your attention to a bill that was introduced last week, which I don't think would be good for education at all. But I think it's a bill that we need to study carefully this week to see the ins and outs of it, because I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions about it. House Bill 1418, which if certain conditions are met, would transfer hundreds of millions of dollars in state general revenue from education, higher education, health and human services over to highway and roads. And while I think we all believe highway and roads are critical to state economic development, nobody would argue that. I think we need to look at these triggers to make sure that we aren't going to inadvertently hurt the very populations that we're trying to help in the short term. So with that, I've taken too much time already. Thank you for the opportunity to address the caucus today. Sure to appreciate it and happy to answer any questions.
Members, are there any questions for Mr. Huddleston? Senator Elliott, you're recognized.
Mr. Huddleston, could you give us a little bit more specificity about the extent to which the Arkansas Opportunity to Learn campaign is grassroots oriented? Could you talk about that just a little bit more?
Sure. The Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, our main role in the coalition is really just doing a lot of the research and data and some of the policy stuff. Fortunately, the Arkansas Public Policy Panel, as I said earlier, they staff it day to day. And they're just a phenomenal grassroots organizing group that works.